All right, we're back with a Fox News alert. Investigators working around the clock to find the cause of the deadly mid-air crash in D.C.
Meanwhile, President Trump is ordering a review of DEI in aviation, warning it may have played a role in the tragedy.
How badly everything's run since he's run the Department of Transportation. He's a disaster. He was a disaster as a mayor. He ran his city into the ground, and he's a disaster now. The Department of Transportation, his government agency charged with regulating civil aviation. Well, he runs it, 45,000 people, and he's run it right into the ground with his diversity.
So it was kind of extraordinary. We watched the president come out along with the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Transportation multiple times yesterday and speak up often because of this tragedy that took place a couple of days ago. Here to react, the Secretary of Defense for the first time as his new position, Pete Hegseth. Pete, I wish it was under different circumstances.
Good morning.
What have you found out over the last 24 hours you could tell our audience, except for the last thing we knew is that we've had two pretty experienced Black Hawk pilots, right?
That's right, three. And good morning to you all. It is a tough way to start, and we've tried to lean forward and be as transparent as possible, while also respecting, of course, the families of those affected, the 64 on top of that in that civilian airline, and then the 3 soldiers who have been notified. The next of kin have been notified, and we're being careful about that as well. Yeah, you got 3 Black Hawk pilots on effectively an annual night qualification run. So there's a corridor there that is utilized near Reagan National Airport that the military uses for exercises that are routine. But as you know, guys, nothing is routine in the military, whether it involves a training exercise or real world. In this particular case, they were qualifying on a night flight, which included night vision goggles. Now, we don't know is whether the goggles were engaged or up. And anyone that's been in the military knows you might use them, you might flip them up while flying. But if the qualification was a night flight, they could have been used. You have a lot of ambient light, a lot of things happening around Reagan. There can be depth perception problems. Again, that's speculation. Our investigation will tell us more. We also don't yet have the black box from the Black Hawk. When we do, we'll get a sense of internal communications. That might tell us exactly who was piloting that Black Hawk. You had a captain in training. You had a chief warrant officer, too, as an instructor. And then you also had a staff sergeant in that Black Hawk as well. Who was talking, who was on the comms, who was piloting, and then what, if any, confusion was there at the end, right? We're looking at altitude. And the president was clear about that. Someone was at the wrong altitude. The investigation will help us understand that. Was the Black Hawk too high? Was it on course? Right now, we don't quite know. But what I want to tell your viewers and the nation is we will get to the bottom of what happened here. It's completely unacceptable in our nation's capital or anywhere. The military trains, and it trains robustly. And we're not going to stop training, even though there's a pause on this unit, on this exercise, which is an important one, and we should have that pause until we get to the bottom of this. We have to train. We have to train safely. So something like this can never happen and is completely unacceptable.
So, Mr. Secretary, one of the requests that some people are making is to get rid of this program as well. They say there's too many helicopters with the planes in the sky, but this guys can't get rid of this because, according to the reports, this was a part of the continuity of government, which is the protection if a president or something catastrophic happens. You guys got to get them to safe locations. So you just can't get rid of this program, right?
Yeah, Lawrence, without getting into anything that's classified, there are many things that happen in and around the Capitol that ensure, in a contingency, in an emergency, our government is able to continue to operate. And what happened in this particular instance was one of those types of flights. I mentioned it at the press conference yesterday, a continuity of government. There are other aspects to what is done there. And you need to train as you fight. You need to rehearse in ways that would reflect a real world scenario. Now, there are ways to do that mitigates risk, right? And that's our job at the Defense Department, at the U.S. Army, is make sure we're mitigating risk when training has happened, especially when it's around civilian aircraft. We need civilians, those traveling to our nation's capital or elsewhere, to know that they're safe when landing at Reagan or anywhere else. That is first and foremost for us. At the same time, how do we make sure we train as robustly as possible, as safely as possible, to ensure if, unfortunately, there were a real world event where things needed to happen, we could respond to it.
Pete, let's
day
talk
or
about
night. And that's why night vision goggles are trained on in that scenario. Day or night has to be trained for.
Pete, let's talk about DEI, what was happening in the control tower. We talked to Congressman Troy Nehls, and he said at this airport, which is the busiest runway in our country, they needed 30 personnel inside the control tower. There were currently 19 when this crashed. And then there's a lawsuit that alleged that the FAA turned away nearly 1,000 air traffic controller applicants solely based on race last year. And then there is a report that the FAA launched a national outreach program for DEI, which included a push to hire workers with severe intellectual disabilities and psychiatric problems. When you're a mom and you're a dad and you're putting your kids on the plane or you're flying as a family, that's unacceptable. We don't care your race. We want to make sure whoever's in there, that it's fully manned, and we want to make sure they're qualified.
Completely unacceptable. Ainsley, you're exactly right. So I don't know exactly how the staffing occurred in that particular air traffic control tower. And it sounds like there was a shortage, and the investigation will tell us more about that. But the environment around which we choose pilots or air traffic controllers, as the president pointed out correctly yesterday, better be the highest possible standard, the best of the best who are managing, multiple flights. I mean, a flight a minute and managing radio traffic. I think the closest analogy to military service, guys, is pilots or air traffic controllers. I don't care what background they come from, what their race is, what their gender is, if they're rich or they're poor. I just need them to be good at their job because I need my flight to land safely. The same thing applies to the Defense Department, to our military. I don't care about your background, your gender, or your skin color. I want the best. And that's why when the president says merit-based and colorblind, he's exactly right across government. So he's correct to point out at the FAA or in our flights, it should not be about anything other than excellence. That's it, excellence. Right. I don't care the color of the skin of the pilot on my plane or in the air traffic controller. But we've, for too long under Biden, cared about those things, emphasized those things, pushed real or perceived quotas. At the Defense Department, we're ending all of that. It's been made very clear across all of our services and commands. It is merit only, and that means we'll get the best of the best. And that's what our taxpayers and the American people expect and deserve. And in the business of warfighting, which the Defense Department is in, if you don't have the best of the best, you lose people. And that's why this is so important.
All right, so if we can, and by the way, people say on the Black Hawk, ideally you like a 4-person crew with 2 in the back, being able to look at both sides of the helicopter. Does it bother you that it was a 3-man crew?
It's a good question, Brian. I've been in many Black Hawks, some of which had 3, some of which had a whole squad in the back, some of which had 4. That is a part of our investigation. I want your viewers and everyone else to know we're leaning forward on as robust accountability and transparency as possible. We want you to know what we know as soon as we can provide it. Absolutely. That's why we're here. That's why we announced we were in real time talking about it. Why I talked about it right away yesterday in my office is we don't want the American people to feel like things are being held back that we can then therefore disclose. So that is part of our investigation from CID, from Army Aviation. What were the circumstances by which that flight was exactly where it is, the people that were there, the communications, and the altitude. And as soon as we know that, you will know that.
So, Mr. Secretary, there's been some pushback, and I think there's some people within the inside that are putting out information that doesn't represent you or the president. Because they tried to, when you ended DEI in the military, tried to say that you didn't want the Tuskegee Airmen, which is about their merit. And you immediately, I know you, but some of the people don't know you. It was trying to cut your legs out before you can even get the program out. The Tuskegee Airmen have nothing to do with DEI, but they use this as a way to discredit the movement, right?
That's exactly right. The Tuskegee Airmen are an example of courageous merit. Of the greatest Americans and their ability to overcome and accomplish incredible things because of their skill, courage, and acumen. What you're referring to, Lawrence, is something I like to call malicious implementation.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do this, but we'll do it in a way that tries to make you look bad by canceling things that make the public think you're against a certain race or you're radical in your implementation. That's why we were very clear on that. Thankfully, I will say this, in this building at the Pentagon, and it's a big building with a lot of people in it, the vast majority of folks we have interacted with or I've spoken to are thrilled, are excited about the opportunity to get rid of these programs that have been divisive, that have divided units, that have created formal or informal quota systems. That's gone. And ultimately, equality carries the day. As you know, equality is different than equity. Equality means everyone has an equal shot. Equity means equal outcomes. That can't exist in the military. So an outfit like the Tuskegee Airmen's, we will salute and we will elevate. And we want every service member to understand what they did. That's very different than DEI programs.
Yeah, you have served our country in the military, and you were assigned to Gitmo, and I know you have a lot of experience. You've talked about that when you were on Fox and Friends often. And now Trump is making a move to prepare Gitmo for 30,000 criminal migrants. Tell us more about this and what your opinion is.
Yeah, Ainsley, it's a smart move. It's the perfect place. And I'd say that as someone who's spent a year there with a platoon guarding detainees at the detention facility. So there's sort of two parts to this. First, as we've said from the beginning, no one will wait on the Defense Department. We will be a key element of expulsions and mass deportation. So as we identify criminal illegals in our country, the military is leaning forward to help with moving them out to their home countries or someone else in the interim. Now, if they can't go somewhere right away, they can go to Guantanamo Bay. There's two aspects to it. One, the migrant facilities. So going back to the 90s, there were tens of thousands of Haitians and Cuban migrants who were housed there because it was a transit point in the Caribbean. And I knew of those places when I was there, and those were going to stand up fairly quickly. You can get thousands of individuals in tents, secured in places at Guantanamo Bay. There's also the eventuality that we could have hardened criminals, hardened gang members with violent criminal pasts in transit. If that is the case, we're preparing options for the actual detention facilities, the detention facilities that are basically supermax prisons there at Guantanamo Bay, to temporarily be used to house them. We don't want to put our personnel, any Americans, at risk in transit. So if you have those existing facilities, let's use them. And we will use them to serve the interest of the American people who've been suffering under an open border and an invasion under Joe Biden. And we've said enough is enough. They're going home. So Guantanamo Bay is a perfect transit point to temporarily house the worst of the worst until we move them back to their home countries, who, as President Trump has made it very clear, better be prepared to take them robustly and soon. Because they sent them here, sent criminals, opened their jails. It affected our people. The president is reversing that. Guantanamo Bay will be a part of that.
Right. You just don't want it to be cost prohibitive in the transportation and the housing, because we know how much it's costing us now to keep Khalid Sheikh Mohammed alive. So we'll see about that. Pete, we know that excuse me, Mr. Secretary, we know that the drug cartels have been declared terrorist organizations. And if you find that, and we know if there's al-Qaeda, we're going to hit them. I don't care if you're in Somalia, Sudan, or in Syria. If we find that they continue to fire at our border controls and they continue to put fentanyl into our country, as the Secretary of Defense, are you permitted now to go after them in Mexico or wherever they are?
Brian, I don't want to get ahead of the president, and I won't. That's ultimately going to be his decision. But let me be clear, all options will be on the table. If we're dealing with what are designated to be foreign terrorist organizations who are specifically targeting Americans on our border, and we're finally securing our border. We've been securing other people's border for a very long time. The military is shifting toward an understanding of homeland defense on our sovereign territorial border. That is something we will do and do robustly. So we're already doing it. Should there be other options necessary to prevent the cartels from continuing to pour people, gangs, and drugs and violence into our country, we will take that on. So the president will make that call. I'll work with him in that decision-making process. Ultimately, we will hold nothing back to secure the American people.
So, Mr. Secretary, there hasn't been much time for you to celebrate your nomination. You have to hit the ground running. You got a plane crash with one of your helicopters there. You're tackling DEI within the organization, trying to get recruitment. What other priorities do you have in your tenure as Secretary of Defense? What are those main goals?
Thanks for the question, Lawrence. I mean, we're restoring the warrior ethos. You mentioned it. Readiness, recruiting, ripping out the things that are detrimental to the force. We're going to rebuild our military. We're going to work with Congress to make sure the DOD is properly funded, but that we're using those funds wisely. That includes things like a Pentagon audit. Taxpayer dollars that come to the DOD better be spent properly. But we also need to ramp up to ensure we're prepared with the most robust capabilities possible, learning from other conflicts. to move to future conflicts, to understand how we orient toward future threats. And that's the last piece. We're going to make sure we orient properly toward emerging threats and reestablish deterrence. So we're rebuilding the military, but we're also reestablishing deterrence. What happened in Afghanistan with the debacle is unacceptable. What happened with the invasion of Ukraine under Joe Biden, unacceptable. What happened on October 7th, unacceptable. All reflections of weakness. Peace through strength is back at the Pentagon. Our enemies will know that we mean business, and we're going to lean forward to ensure that those that want to threaten American interests or American security specifically understand exactly where we stand. So our friends know we're there standing with them. I've been on the phone with foreign ministers of defense behind the scenes this entire time, reaffirming those connections. And we've been clear. The Communist Chinese are a threat, not just to the region, but to the world. We're going to lean forward in making sure they understand we see that. The president is a master at negotiations and international relations, so he's going to talk to foreign leaders. But we're going to make sure he has the options to orient and then responsibly end wars as well in other places around the globe. So it's a new day at the Pentagon that reflects the America First agenda of this president. And we're going to treat every day with urgency, every day as if we have to lean forward and be prepared to defend the American people.
And Pete, Mr. Secretary, you're in a unique time in which Silicon Valley actually wants to help the Pentagon as opposed to stop the Pentagon. Help the Pentagon move us forward while we try to expand our industrial base.
Pete, congratulations.
Yes.
Just confirmed last Friday. This is our first interview with you. Mr. Secretary, feels good to say
gonna
that.
take some
And Brian,
getting
you can
used
always
to.
call me Pete. You can always call me Pete.
Right.
It's okay.
I
love you guys. It's good to see you all
But it
this morning.
shows.
Thank you.
I want to show the respect that you've earned. Thanks.
That's right.
Thanks so much.
And that was
I
quite a
appreciate you all.
fight.
Yeah. Thanks,
You
Mr.
won.
Secretary.
The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Thank you, sir.